Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me in session 151 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. In today's episode, I speak with Dr. Nasiah Cirincione-Ulezi about a range of topics, and we spent the majority of time talking about her recent paper in Behavior Analysis and Practice titled Black Women and Barriers to Leadership in ABA. If you're not familiar with Nasiah, she is the CEO of Ulezi LLC and Pivot to Inclusion, and we talk about those agencies in this episode as well. But getting back to her paper in Behavior Analysis and Practice, if you haven't read it, just do me a favor, pause this show and go read it right now. You can find a link to it in the show notes of this episode. It's really a sobering account of some of the struggles faced by Black women in our field. She highlights the motivation as to why she wrote this paper, the methods that she chose to examine this topic, and some of her conclusions. So I don't want to spoil her findings here in this introduction. Let's just say it is unsettling, certainly, and at the same time, it's necessary to hear about these challenges so we can figure out how to move forward and make improvements. And fortunately, on that note, Nasiah does discuss some potential solutions and more generally provides us with some things to think about this topic. In this episode, we also discussed a few other things, including our upcoming keynote address at this year's Virginia ABA conference. It's scheduled for April 16th and 17th. The Virginia Association is offering this event both as a safe and socially distanced in-person event as well as a virtual experience. So if you want to hear Nasiah talk, despite where you live, you can go to virginiaaba.org and register to participate virtually. And if you do sign up, use the code GOMBU. That's, I think, a nod to their sponsor, Mary Baldwin University. Use the code GOMBU to save at registration. I'll have the link to that in the show notes as well. And at the end of the show, we close out the show talking about the practice of life coaching, and that might sound maybe a little, I guess, off base in a behavior analytic conversation, but it is a service that Nasiah provides, and we talk about that, talk about what that looks like from a behavior analytic context. And so I found that part of our chat quite fascinating. And then you're really going to want to stick around to the end of the show because she closes out with some just fantastic advice for not only newly minted BCBAs, but BCBAs of all practice levels. So again, just a real fun conversation. Huge thanks to Nasiah for stopping by and chatting with me. All right, before we get to the conversation itself, I want to let you know that this podcast is brought to you with support from the Gateway Learning Group and their Autism Leadership Academy. It's designed for new regional directors. The Autism Leadership Academy develops motivated BCBAs into successful leaders in the autism field. If you're interested in running your own regional center and want to learn the skills to do so successfully, check out gatewaylg.com/BOP. And just as a side note, they have immediate openings available in Texas for clinical directors, and BCBAs across the country are encouraged to apply. I also want to let you know about the Behavioral Observations Patreon group. Patrons were able to access a commercial-free version of this show a few days ago. So in addition to early access to episodes, there are sometimes bonus podcasts that I'll put out. We'll do Zoom hangouts with former guests. There's discounts to CEU events, both at the Behavioral Observations CEU store, and there's some discounts also available for Greg Hanley's practice group, FTF, and their on-demand continuing ed offerings. I'm taking one of those courses right now. They're phenomenal. So go to patreon.com/behavioral observations to learn more. All right, I think that's it for opening announcements. So without any further delay, please enjoy this fun and wide-ranging conversation with Dr. Nasiah Cirincione-Ulezi.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Cicoria.
Dr. Nasiah Cirincione-Ulezi, thank you so much for joining me today on the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How are you doing?
I am doing good. And Matt Cirincione, thank you so much for having me on the Behavioral Observations podcast.
The pleasure is all mine. We have so much to talk about. We're just, if people were able to listen in on the kind of pre-interview chit chat, we were kind of going over a lot of things that I'm really excited to get into. So
yes.
Before we do that, though, I want to have the audience get to know you a little bit better. So I'd love for you to tell the story about how you got into behavior analysis. How'd you discover it? What made you want to pursue it as a career? I know before we started recording, you said you have been in the field for a while and were credentialed later in your career. So I'd love you to kind of just set the stage for this by giving us some background.
I sure will. Now, it's going to take a while because my path has not been linear.
Go right ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Matt, I'm an old timer in the field. I started way back in the early 90s, right out of high school, working as a frontline with adults with developmental disabilities. I hail from Illinois, so I worked in a small agency called Cornerstone in Joliet, Illinois, and I kept that position all through college. Absolutely love the work. And at that time, way back in the day, there weren't behavior analysts, board certified behavior analysts. Back then, I was working closely with psychologists, and they really exposed me to what the science could do for people's lives. Now, when I got through college, I ended up going to college to become a special education teacher. So that work pulled me away from the adults, and I got exposed to working with the children. And I think my second or third year teaching, I happened upon a classroom that was serving children with autism. And Matt, I tell you, I was bit by the bug. It was fascinating. And again, back in those days, there wasn't the board certified behavior analyst. I was working closely with the psychologists and the speech path, and they really provided me my training, but I loved it. And beyond the science, because back then I really couldn't tack that. Beyond the science, what I loved was the connection I had with these little people. And you know, my personality, I wouldn't consider myself hyper vocal verbal. I very much communicate in with gestures and with my eyes. That's very powerful for me. And when I went into this classroom and I started working with these young learners with autism, they resonated with that. They loved that. And what did that do, Matt? That reinforced my teaching behaviors. My children, they thrived in my classroom. And I was very proud of that. So early on in my career, you know, I contacted a lot of reinforcement as a teacher. And I remember several years, and I was completing a doctoral program. By then it was kind of the late 90s. And my supervisor came to me and she said, you know, Nasiah, there's this credential, a certificate. I think you should look into it. It's called the Board Certified Behavior Analyst. And Matt, I looked at her. I said, really? I'm finishing my doctorate. What do I need to go and get a certificate for? Little did I know. But anyway, I chose not to do it because I was, you know, happy I was doing well. I ended up leaving my work as a classroom teacher in kind of the early 2000s. And I took a position at Chicago State University in the special education department as an assistant professor there. And eventually transitioned out of that work back into setting up programs with public schools, setting up programs that serve children with autism. And it was interesting. By the time I made it back to the public school realm, there were a ton of young BCBAs. And this is what happened. This is really what drove me back into the classroom in my 40s to get the BCBA. Matt, by this point, I have almost over 20 years of experience. But when I had direct reports who were BCBAs and I would give them feedback, what I started encountering was, well, you're not a BCBA. So I was shocked. You know, I truly value being seen and being heard. So because I didn't have these credentials, this BCBA, I had 2 masters and a doctorate by this point, but I didn't have the BCBA. Mm-hmm. That really served as an impetus to push me back into the classroom. And I went to take the 6 courses to get the BCBA. And now I do have it. And I will tell you, it's interesting. The credential has opened up doors, and I am more fully seen and more fully heard in the field, which we can reflect on that. Mm-hmm. Because it really wasn't until I got those letters that people really heard me. It's like all of a sudden I was seen, or maybe even a better term, Matt, is I was validated.
I see.
Which is unfortunate, because even before I got the credential, I had so much to offer, so much to share. So that was my path. And that's really what drove me back into the classroom to get these credentials at a later point in my career.
Yeah. You know, I hear the stories like that from time to time, and it really kind of bums me out how we can be so, I don't know, provincial, or probably grasping at straws at the right adjective, I suppose.
Yes.
You know, and I'm hoping that that's an artifact of the field's growing pains, and it's something that we can, as the BCBA credential becomes, further established, that's something that kind of goes away over time. But I totally hear you. You know, there's a colleague I work with right now, and she's a BCABA, but there are so many aspects of behavior analysis that she can, kind of program circles around me. Yes. I don't look at it as a hierarchical, relationship, So I totally get that. I may not have always had that perspective, but it's something. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting though, hearing some of your early experiences that we're in the same age range, and yes. I remember when there was no such thing as the board,
Yes.
And, or maybe it was just in its early stages back in Florida. And I remember having conversations with my office mate, who I actually went to school with at the time, and she's like, "There's this board certification thing.
Yeah.
Do you want to study together and take the test?" I'm like, I guess, So
right.
So I always have to credit my grad school classmate, Dr. Cheryl Ecott, for prodding me to take the exam. So anyway, so one of the things I really want to talk to you about is, before we get to the paper, I want you to kind of continue giving a little bit of background and letting the audience know what are you doing now. I know you have your own agency and things like that.
Yes.
So if you could take a minute to describe what that is and the people you serve and things like that, that would be
Absolutely.
Super.
A better question would be, what am I not doing now?
I'm doing the shorter list.
Yes, I'm doing a little bit of everything now and enjoying every minute of it, Matt. I really am. But I will tell you, yes, I do have a couple of businesses. One of them, Ulezi LLC. That right now I serve children, birth through 21. The primary focus of that work right now is early intervention. I'm doing a lot with assessments and parent training. I also contract with a larger agency in the area to work with adults. Love, that's still a passion. It was my early work, but I revisited it in the past 10 years, and it's work that I love, especially now that I have so much perspective. My work with adults really informs my work with young children and family. Because I'm able to really fully share and really help them to think forward. You know, sometimes when we work with our families with autism, it can be so incredibly hard to look to the future. But because I am working within the adult system, there's so many conversations I can have with families in a very compassionate way that helps them look to the future without it being so scary. So I do that. And I recently started another business, and it's consulting around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, that is truly my passion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is something I've really worked on most of my life, even as a child. But this particular business, we support, myself and my business partner. Again, it's called Pivot to Inclusion, but we support organizations in meeting their goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for the clientele we take on, it's people who are committed to a long-term process. So it's not at all, we're going to come in and do diversity training. That's not it. We're going to come in and help you shift mindset. We're going to come in and help you really look at your values around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, I'm actually at a stage in life where I am just loving everything I'm doing. And for as many growing pains as we're having in our field right now, what I so love is the conversations we're having and being able to bear witness to our evolution as a field. You know, let me tell you. Oh, let me stop. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sure you have some questions you want to ask, Matt.
Oh, I was dying to know what you're about to tell me, so you can continue.
And let me continue. You know, I'm in some amazing conversations with people these days. It just so happened a couple months ago, I was sitting and talking to Dr. Gordon Borland. Wonderful, humble man in the field, senior most person in our field. And I told him about my work around cultural humility. And he was interested, and he referred me to an article that was written in 1991. The article was written by Alan Nuringer, Dr. Alan Nuringer, and it was called Humble Behaviorism. Now, Matt, I had been walking around here training on cultural humility like I have invented it in this field. And here we had this work that 30 years ago, he wrote this article, and it actually couldn't be more relevant today. So typically when I'm on these platforms, I always reference that article because there were people in our field who had their pulse on what it is we need to be as a professional community, as a scientific community. And I'm just so thrilled that we have evolved to the point where we're actually kind of moving towards a more inclusive field. People, I guess there's more awareness. I see increased awareness, and that is makes me incredibly hopeful.
All right, I want to take a quick break from this conversation and let you know that this episode is brought to you by the Gateway Learning Group and their Autism Leadership Academy. The Autism Leadership Academy is an exclusive masterclass in leadership that develops motivated BCBAs into successful leaders at Gateway and in the autism field more broadly. When you join the Gateway Learning Group as a regional director, you'll immerse yourself in the Autism Leadership Academy, which is an intensive management training program. Leaders from Gateway will share their expertise with you in all aspects of business operations, marketing, leadership, and recruitment. And upon graduation from the Autism Leadership Academy, new regional directors will launch ABA therapy services in their own regions. With weekly mentorship from a senior regional director, new regional directors will hire staff, open offices, and launch direct therapy services in their own communities. In collaboration with local school districts and healthcare providers, they'll fill needs for services in the local communities to support individuals with autism and their families. As members of Gateway's management team, new regional directors will aim to achieve year-end clinical and operational goals as they continue to grow their service areas. So if you're a BCBA with a passion for learning and a desire to lead, please check out gatewaylg.com/BOP. Yeah, I will certainly put the link to that article in the show notes for this episode so folks can go check it out. Getting back to Pivot to Inclusion, though, is your work... Can you talk to me a little bit about some of the agencies that you support? Are you working with other behavior analytic agencies, or is it beyond the field of behavior analysis, human services, and things like that? Are you working with what we might consider kind of other I guess people outside of our the healthcare or helping professions?
Yes. Well, right now we are open to working with people outside of the field of behavior analysis. But right now, because that's where we're at, we're supporting agencies within the field. And it's, again, very rich work because our field, because of the way we're trained, it can often feel almost antithetical to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And especially with the practices and tools we bring in, it feels different for some of the people that we are supporting, but it's rich and we're seeing some awesome outcomes. We're getting great feedback. Again, the way we work, we really get people to think about and address diversity and equity and inclusion by first reflecting inward. A lot of people share the sentiment like, okay, we're going to get people of color in our agency and that's going to fix it. Well, no, if you haven't done the internal work of reflecting on your systems, of evaluating what your values are, then you're going to get, a diverse environment, and it's going to create a multitude of problems, a multitude of challenges. So that's what we try to support agencies in creating, not just diversity, but shifting culture so it's inclusive and facilitates belonging.
Awesome. I couldn't think of a better segue to the topic that I want to talk about here, and that's your article from August 2020 in Behavior Analysis and Practice. The article is titled "Black Women and Barriers to Leadership in ABA." So I want to give you the opportunity to talk about it, but I guess my first starting question with regard to this paper is, what motivated you to undertake the research that you conducted to prepare the paper, and your answer, by all means, describe that process. I'm really interested to hear about it.
Okay, sure. Well, what I present in the paper are things that have really been on my mind for a number of years in our field, but let me take a step back for what set the occasion for me to write. Dr. Jonathan Joseph Tarbox put out a call for manuscripts a couple years before this paper was published. And, I really do respect Dr. Jonathan Joseph Tarbox and his way of working and being and facilitating change in our field. But he put out this call in such a way that it really enticed me and it drew me in. I can't remember the exact words he used, but he said, we have a call for manuscripts and you don't have to have a doctorate degree. You don't have to be white, and you don't have to be a man. And I said, oh, I said, okay. Well, he's talking to me. So what I did was, because I'm not published. At that point, I wasn't published in the field. Mm-hmm. So publication, like anything else, you have to develop the skills to do it. And what I do when I don't have the skills yet developed to do something, I reach out to others who do. So I reached out to Dr. Tarbox and told him, just bounced around some ideas. And I had a whole list of things that I wanted to talk about. You work in a field for nearly 30 years, you just develop a list, Matt. That's just what happens. And as part of the list, I said, I identified, Black women and barriers to leadership. And he looked at the list and he was like, oh, Nasiah, look, the field needs this one. I said, okay, I'm here for it. And that really, again, set the occasion for me to dive deep into my own lived and professional experience in this field, kind of spit out in this paper.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. I, having gotten to know Jonathan a little bit through his coming on the show a couple of times and meeting him at conferences and whatnot, I can imagine he just must have been over the moon for this particular topic. So, so you interviewed several BCBAs, Black women BCBAs, and I'd love to understand what the process was. So you and your thinking behind it. This is, I guess, what we consider perhaps a more qualitative approach to research. And so what you didn't do is give like a structured survey with a Likert scale and stuff like that. So these were conversations that you had. So I'd love for you to inform the audience a little bit more about that. How you get through this process, how you found people, and so on and so forth.
Oh yes. Well, I would love to inform the audience how I did that, Matt. Let me tell you. The past few years, what I had started doing was holding CE events, continuing education events. And I would hold them in my home, in my living room. I would hold them at the public library. And what I found was when Black women came, and that's who supported me, Black women by and large, my 2-hour CE event would turn into a 5-hour continuing education event. And we would talk about and deconstruct and analyze our lived experience in the field. It was our way of really supporting each other. And what I found was, there was a burden. And let me say this too before I get too far in this, what I'm going to share. We as Black women are not a monolith. So when I speak, we arrive in this field, and I mentioned that in our paper, from different perspectives, from different lived experiences, just from a variety of different ways. So when I'm speaking and what I shared in the paper is very much from my lived experience and the women who are around me. Now, keep in mind, I'm in contact with I'm active in the Black behavior analytic community. And I'm in contact and in conversation with many other Black women and women of color. But that was it. I chose to do these direct interviews and observations because it has been my experience. That's where the most authentic information comes from. And again, it's our culture as women. We as women, this is the way we comfort each other. This is the way we support each other. We talk to each other. We get in conversation. And again, I'm at an age where I'm not going to fight that. That's my way of being as a woman. This is our culture. So I capitalized on that, these amazing conversations that I have had with women, and I structured them just a little bit, meaning I set aside space and time. And Matt, I tell you, the women that I talked to, that I interviewed, we shared laughter, we shared tears. But the process of just telling the story through this paper for the women who I connected with, it was very cathartic for me and for them, because it really gave voice to what we were experiencing, what we are. We're still experiencing it in the field of behavior analysis. So that's it. That's why I chose that method. It certainly, I think, yielded more authentic data.
I see. Cool. So you had 5 interviewees?
Yes.
Okay.
All BCBAs.
Nice. And so could you describe, I mean, you go over this in the paper, but could you describe for the audience some of the common challenges and experiences that were revealed in this process?
Yeah. Okay. I'll start with the first one, which is the most obvious, because, and we now have data from the BACB that shows just the lack of diversity in our field, but particularly we lack Black practitioners at the BCBA level. So one of the challenges that many of us experience is showing up in the workplace as the only one. And let me tell you, Matt, what onlyness does. It creates this paradox. If you're a Black woman, you're hyper visible and you're invisible at the same time. And I guess you maybe it's something very unique to Black women, but with many of the Black women that I talk to, they can relate. Like people, they see this Black skin, it pops. But at the same time, you're invisible. You're not seen and you're not heard. So that was one of the barriers. Then another barrier was something that many of us, and people can catch one of my YouTube videos about stereotypes that are often put upon Black women. One of them being the stereotype of the angry Black woman. Matt, I will tell you that, or me having to combat that stereotype has shaped my professional behaviors probably more than anything else. And what I mean by that is, as a Black woman, because there's so many images and so many things in our environment that portray Black women as angry, as hostile, as aggressive. And I know how people relate to those frames. I have often actively tried to avoid appearing angry and hostile, because when those labels are placed upon me, I've contacted punishment a lot for my vocal verbal behaviors. And it, at least, for the first couple decades of my career, it kept me quiet. It very much pulled me away from what my values were. So I would show up in the workplace and I would see maybe something was wrong and I wouldn't speak up because I was afraid of appearing as the angry Black woman. Now today, I will tell you, I show up how I show up. I show up authentically. But I want to just keep it real, because I don't know if everyone is aware of this, that when you are a Black woman in the workplace and you're trying to avoid appearing angry, hostile, aggressive, and you have to make moment-to-moment decisions about when to be quiet and when to speak, that is erosive to the soul.
Yeah, it sounds very stressful.
It is stressful. And what I described, or what one of the interviewees described it as, is a slow drip that burns you out. So again, I mentioned in the article, I talk about racial battle fatigue. And it's a thing.
Yeah, I remember reading that section.
Yes, it's a thing, another barrier. So you're dealing with this in the workplace. Then when leadership positions become open, it's like, do I really want to take that on? If this organization is not supporting me as a BCBA, am I really going to step into a leadership position? I'm tired. No, I'll stay where I'm at. And I see that happening over and over again. I see it happening too much, Matt.
I see. Gosh. Did you see this in the public school setting that you taught in? Or is this something that you found kind of more unique to the setting that you're practicing in these days?
Yeah, I will tell you, the public schools, public education, and I can get into this later too, but because of the training is very different in the educational system than the training we get in applied behavior analysis. So I saw, certainly there is marginalization within the field of education. I'm not naive. I won't say there's not, but it's not to the depth that it is in the field of behavior analysis. And I have some thoughts as to why our field looks like it does, and as to why many of our BIPOCs face the contingencies that they do related to kind of moving up and being elevated to leadership roles in our field.
I see. Yeah. By all means, please share that.
Okay. Yeah. I really, because of my training as an early childhood special educator, I have been well trained about systems, about how systems work. And if I look at our system in behavior analysis, our culture, the system, our governance is very top down. Our training does not give our practitioners any experience with understanding systems. We're talking a lot now about systemic racism. And for a lot of our folks, systemic racism is like racism that happens in a building, but not truly. There's not a true understanding of how macro level systems influence micro level systems. So we have this large overarching macro system, and everything that happens at that level is going to impact what is happening at that family system and at that individual level. And I think we need to, as a field, really look at how we're training our practitioners. And I think as behavior analysts, we need to have some training in systems theory.
Okay.
Another piece, because I was cross-trained, I got exposure to reflective practice as an early childhood special educator. And what part of the work that I do now is helping organizations engage in reflective practice. And what I find for behavior analysts, it is incredibly hard for them to reflect. Now this is the thing. And when I say reflect, just looking inward, not just describing events that happen, but really looking inward to ask yourselves questions, to ask ourselves questions about what's happening. That is difficult for many of us, especially for the folks who've practiced in the field for a long time or who haven't had any experience doing it. So reflective practice is different from just reflective thinking. Reflective practice is actually setting aside in a very consistent and routine way time. It has that temporal component, time to reflect. And we don't do it as a field. We do a lot, but we don't take time to stop, pause, and reflect. And I think by doing those things, introducing systems theory into that 6-course sequence, embedding it there, and introducing this whole concept of us as a field becoming more reflective practitioners and embracing that training could fundamentally shift our field, Matt. It could fundamentally shift it. Let me tell you, I had a conversation with Dr. Nuringer, the author of Humble Behaviorism, and he shared with me his research on taking that pause that reflective practice sets the occasion for. And in his research, what he found was when you take that pause before stimulus and response, it sets the occasion to make a better, more informed decision. And that's from his research. And he gave that to me. He gave that information to me from direct communication. So there is, empirical evidence that this pause in reflecting can help us to reduce reactivity. It can help us with bias, to manage our own bias. And it can help us to really show up more humble and as more effective practitioners.
Yeah, I had a supervisor once who encouraged us supervisees to schedule in time to think, because there's this tendency to go, you
had it.
And do clinical stuff all the time. And, it's a constant decision making, writing,
Yes.
programming, blah, 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 blah. And she was very clear. You got to schedule in time to think. And I think, and pretty much what she was getting at is the reflective piece of that, not just backwards, but also forwards.
Yes.
So I apologize. I think I got you a little bit off track, but we got into some good stuff. So it's all good. But so you were describing some of the challenges that your interview subjects related, the concept of being the only one, battling stereotypes, racial battle fatigue. I recall reading something about people being interrupted in meetings and talked over. They would suggest an idea and someone else would only act on it when a white person said the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to give you a chance to kind of continue to kind of elaborate on some of these common challenges that you've learned about.
Yes. That in our field, again, because of the contingencies that govern all of our behaviors, again, going back to what I said before, often in our field, if you're a white male, you're seen, you're heard. Competence is often assumed. So when you show up as me, I'm a person in Black skin, Black female skin, people don't see, Matt, a lot of me. They don't see people who look like me, may not even hear people that sound like me. So it's easy, just based on what our learning histories are, is to, when I show up, to kind of dismiss what it is I have to say. And how does that come out? It comes out in meetings as being talked over, as being what I say being discounted. And that has that's another one of the barriers that I can say with women I'm in conversation with experience quite frequently, especially around too, the assumption of Black women not being competent, Black women not being able to do the job, which again, I can speak for myself. I found myself, and I have to do a lot of reflection around this in certain situations when I go down that rabbit hole of feeling I have to prove myself, feeling I have to prove I'm worthy because I have been met with so many experiences to where I have to prove I belong here because I'm always kind of on the outside, always questioned at a different level than I see my white counterparts. I'm held to a different level of accountability. And again, that is from my own lived professional experience and from that of the women I'm in frequent contact with.
One of the things I was thinking about when I was reading your paper was of course, just, having a behavioral science background, I'm always thinking about variables, right? And do you think the experiences that were revealed in this process are shared by Black men in the field? And before we actually started recording our conversation, I was sharing that a lot of these things, my wife, who's white, has experienced as just part of being a woman in the workplace. Of she's battled the good old boys club in our local school district for forever. And so some of these passages that I was reading, it's like, wow, I've heard this from I think Sean Capel, who's been on the podcast, he wrote an article on his blog a few years ago about going to ABAI and being only one of a very few African-American men in attendance. So can you talk about that? Is this something that you think that there's some commonalities amongst these different kind of groups? I'll just let you take it from there.
Yes. Love Sean Capel, by the way. I do, and love his work. This is what I'll say about that. I won't speak to what I will say. Yes, there is intersection. I won't speak to the lived experience of people with other identities. I believe there's certainly intersection with some of these variables that I identify in my paper. What I will say is I very intentionally spoke about Black women. One, because I am a Black woman. And two, because I think my experience, although there's intersection with other identities, is so nuanced and unique. It's so nuanced and unique showing up in this field as a Black woman. Because you see more now, especially in the last year, but you see so few of us. And it is created, or there is, for most people, a very flawed observational learning history. I looked at all the images that are put out from our professional organizations. And up until very recently, most of the invited speakers at our conferences have been mostly white men. So that's what many folks, especially our early career practitioners, they look at white men as the folks who hold the knowledge, the knowledge keepers, the authority. Up until very recently, Matt, I can't recall looking at our largest professional organization and seeing Black women as invited speakers in high rates. I did the diversity analysis, and that's in the paper. between 2017 and I think 2019, we even struggled as a field, and this is where that intersection came in, to have women as invited speakers.
Mm-hmm.
So let alone Black women.
I want to ask you about some of the feedback you've received about this paper. I have to imagine your email must have just gotten completely blown up.
Yeah.
Can you describe some of the reactions that you've gotten from readers of this work?
Yes, I can, because there's been different response classes, Matt. It really has. Let me tell you, Black women overwhelmingly. I want to cry. It has been, for me to hear that I have amplified the voice and the concerns of Black women has been powerful and profound. Their response has overwhelmingly been, it's about time. Yes. On a weekly basis, I want to say I get at least 5 people who reach out to me and say, Nasiah, I can relate. Yes, this is what I have been experiencing, because it's never been put into kind of words in one of our journals before. So it was incredibly affirming. Now, what we have too is white men. Their response overwhelmingly is, Nasiah, I read your article and it was interesting. And that's the word that's used most of the time. They say it was interesting. And I'm always curious about, what do you mean interesting? I want to know more. Tell me more. And what I find is that many of my white male colleagues had no awareness that this was happening, that this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So they truly do find it interesting. It's almost like, really? So that has been interesting. From women across the board, it's more, yes, Nasiah, this is happening, particularly from Black women. That's the response. But from white males, it's just interesting. I did not know this. They didn't know.
Yeah. I appreciate you asking me that question before we started taping.
I had to ask, because you said it. You were one of the people. You said, Nasiah, I read it and it was interesting. Well, Matt, what was so interesting? That's good feedback for me.
Yeah. So I guess I'll try to reiterate my answer here. And I think a lot of it was, I can't say I was surprised by it, because these conversations have been happening in the field over the last, 6, 12 months and longer, certainly increasing in frequency, of course. And again, a lot of it resonated with the experience of, like I told you about my wife's experiences at work. Yes. Obviously we're in a different, it's a different, situation, obviously, because, but she has had that experience of being talked over at meetings, has had that experience about, making a suggestion and it not being acted upon unless someone else makes it, being seen as angry when she's trying to, make a point and things like that. So, so there's a part of me that was, I was not surprised, and at the same time was also sad.
Yeah.
So to know, that's kind of where we are, so there's but also, it's great that this information's out there. So I think you've done a service by highlighting this. So
I do. And I'm with you. I am so loving these conversations and the multitude of articles that are coming out of this movement, this evolution that we're in right now. So much more research now. I know a few of my colleagues are engaging in research specifically around microaggressions.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that didn't exist in our field a decade ago. So this is incredibly exciting.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things we also talked about this before we start taping, like my mind goes like to like fix it mode, and that maybe that's not entirely, helpful right out of the gate. But, I have to imagine there's people listening to this, whether they're white guys or white women, who might be horrified to know that they have African-American and, employees that may be experiencing this distress. What are some things that agencies can do to address these sorts of things? As behavior analysts, we're all about kind of action and intervention and things like that.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine there's probably some do's and there's probably a whole lot of don'ts. And I was wondering if you can kind of walk us through some considerations for maybe either assessing or addressing this.
Yeah. Let me do share this, because this is such an important part of our conversation. Matt, what I am going to call everyone to do across gender, across race, I want everyone to start listening. Listen. Let's hone up our listening skills. The second piece, and I talked about it earlier, this reflective piece. So not only are you going to listen, but stop. Let's start reflecting. Let's get mindful about what it is we're doing. And the third thing is, this is overarching, is really start getting a very fundamental understanding of how systems work. Mm-hmm. Understand that, because systems, and I'm really getting into Sigrid Glenn's work around meta contingencies. And she is, and I'm learning more, but she has an understanding of these group contingencies and cultural contingencies that impact us. So I think really start to dive deep into how systemic racism can show up in your life, and how, and I didn't say whether or not, I'm saying how are we perpetuating it? Mm-hmm. That's a deep, reflective question. So this is what I'm going to say, because I got this training. Don't just do something, be there. Don't just do something, be there. When I say be there, get present. Get present to what's happening. You said it earlier. You had somebody that trained you to make time to think. Please, if we can push that, Matt, you have a platform. People know you. You have a voice in this field. Let's push that. Let's push. Let's make time to think. Let's make time to reflect. I'm telling you. And remember, y'all done heard it here first on the Behavioral Observations podcast with Nasiah and Matt. We need to become more reflective practitioners. That's it. It's an inside job. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, and moving our field forward, it starts with each one of us looking inward first.
It's an inside job. Love it.
Yeah.
Are you still in contact with your interview subjects?
Yes. Yes.
There's part of me that wants to know how the story ends or how it's going or whatever, and I'm hoping they're in a place of less distress these days.
Oh, let me tell you, the story doesn't end. The work continues. It really does continue. I think the disruption around racial injustice in the past year has really brought things up to the surface. And I think what has happened is many of us have become, because again, we were having these conversations and doing this work before the world disrupted. So many of us now, our voices have been amplified. We are moving into spaces that we weren't in before. But again, that's opened us up to some success. And again, it's opened us up to challenges. Because I'm sitting in some spaces where there has never been a Black woman before. So people are having new and different experiences. They've been opened up to new things as it relates to relating professionally to a Black woman. So the work continues. Things are moving. I say things are moving in the right direction. But what I do see, Matt, is those of us who were engaged in the work before are those of us who are continuing to engage in the work now. I see that because things have settled a bit, there's been a pull away from keeping this conversation about bias and race and social justice. We're pulling away, and it's not at the same frequency and intensity. Mm-hmm. Well, what I'm calling folks to do is don't let these conversations and this work die. Let's make it a routine part of what it is we do in this field, because that will evolve us in a more positive way.
All right, everyone, this is the last commercial break of this episode, so I appreciate you checking it out. I would love for you to check out also the Behavioral Observations Patreon group and see if there's a tier that suits your needs or interests. You can go to patreon.com/behavioral observations. Some of the things we offer include ad-free podcast feeds. We do occasional Zoom hangouts with former guests where patrons can ask questions directly. We also have discounts to all sorts of cool things like CEUs, both in the Behavioral Observations CEU store and also with FTF. That's Greg Hanley and his colleagues consulting group. I'm actually taking the FTF Practical Functional Assessment and Skills-Based Treatment course right now. It is phenomenal. I've learned a lot about this just through my own independent research, but there's so many more details that they get into in this training. It is really worthwhile doing, even if you think you're up to speed on this stuff already. There's just a lot more to learn about it, as I'm finding out right now. So if this sounds like something you're interested in, you can get 20% off these on-demand courses by signing up as a patron. So go to patreon.com/behavioral observations, or you can go to the show notes of this episode, and I will have a link right there waiting for you. All right, thanks for taking this into consideration again, and let's get back to this conversation. I want to shift gears here a little bit, but if there's anything more you want to say about the paper to wrap it up, that's I want to give you the opportunity to do that. But I know you're going to be delivering the keynote to this year's Virginia ABA conference.
Yes.
And so I'd love for you to give, I don't want you to give it away because we want people to sign up and attend, right? But I want you to tell us a little bit about what you plan on talking about and what people can expect to learn.
Awesome. You know, there is such an emphasis on leadership as the title, leadership as the role. But I am grateful to have experienced some people in my life that taught me leadership is a value and it's a way of being that all of us have access to at any point. You know, even all through my career, even when I didn't have the title or a position, Matt, I was still a leader. So VABA That keynote is about getting everybody excited about leadership right where they are. If what you're doing, if you're a BCBA, I will tell you how you can access and live out your leadership in your role. If you are an RBT, I can tell you how you can access your leadership no matter where you are or what position you have. And that's really where I kind of live from. Leadership is such a value for me. And I truly believe that everybody is a leader. You just have to tap into it. So please, if you want to hear that keynote and be inspired and you want to tap into your own leadership potential, I wouldn't miss it.
Awesome. Wow, what a succinct preview. I love it. Yeah, that's virginiaaba.org. I'll have the link in the show notes along with a discount code for listeners. There's going to be a lot of other great talks during that conference as well. Mm-hmm. And I'll be hosting a little Q&A with you and some other presenters too. So that should be fun. So we'll just have to cross our fingers.
It will. Let me give you a little fact about that, about the other speaker. One thing I did mention is for early in my career, for a few years, I taught at the Personalized Curriculum Institute at Malcolm X College. And Dr. Joe Lang he was over that program at that point. So it's such an honor to be able to give this keynote at the same time that he's giving his at VABA.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Yeah, I was meeting with the conference organizers the other day, and they had mentioned that you two had a professional connection. So
yes, and his wife, Dr. Joanne Robbins, was my ed psych teacher in grad school.
Wow.
Small world.
It's such a small world. Such a small world for sure. All right. I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have a few minutes to talk about life coaching? Yes, I do. All right.
So what would you like to know?
All right. So when I was looking at your website for, kind of show prep and things like that, I was looking on the services that you offered. And one of them was amongst all the other stuff in terms of EIBI and et cetera, parent training, whatnot. I saw life coaching.
Yes.
And it's such a, I guess from my perspective, it both is and isn't something I think that's unique in our field. Like there's so I want to ask a little bit about what life coaching is and how you practice it and things like that. There's been acquaintances I've had over the years where I've had friends and people I've known who I feel like could benefit from a behavior analyst to help them, maybe get out of a rut or get their act together or whatever. But at the same time, I'm curious about the boundary lines between that and needing traditional psychotherapy and things like that. So I guess my first question about this is that, from your perspective, what is life coaching, and how does that differ from counseling and other traditional forms of therapeutic intervention?
It's a great question. So if you are seeking out counseling, you're going to be seeking support from someone who is trained to address mental health issues, mental health processes. That is not what I do as a life coach. What I am addressing as a life coach are your goals, personal and professional goals and objectives. Oftentimes, who I'm serving as a life coach is somebody who's stuck, somebody who's reached a point either in a personal or professional relationship, a point with their career. They're stuck. They don't know what next step to take. They don't have processes in place to get them unstuck. And that's what I coach on. And I'm really good at motivating. And what I do is I help to motivate, inspire, and I assist people in putting processes in place via this coaching to help get them unstuck, to just give them a new way of doing things that can push them forward. Matt, have you ever been stuck? And you just need it. We get stuck.
Oh, yes.
I've lived a lot of life, and there's been times where I've gotten stuck and I've had people to come and coach me and just give me a different way and a new perspective in looking at things. And I will tell you, I've been very successful. Now, I coach men and I coach women. A good part of my clientele have been women who come to me. I do a lot of coaching around moving through life transitions. This is the thing, Matt. A lot of people think, once you turn 18, you stop growing and developing. But you know what? I'm here to tell you that these changes and evolution as a human being spans your entire life. And people get stuck. They get stuck at some of these life changes and transitions, and they need the coaching. So that's what I do. And that paired with the behavioral technology is powerful. Identifying what your reinforcers are. I work a lot from ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And I help people tap into, what are your values? Okay, these are your values. What's pulling you away from your values? What's pulling you towards your values? And it's very powerful. And again, a lot of people, these are things that appear simple, but people don't think about what's important to them. And they don't think about what's pulling them away and pulling them toward. So that's what I do.
Very cool. Is there a particular problem that you see people encounter frequently in your work as a life coach?
Yeah, I do. The problems that I see, and again, a bulk of who I serve is women, and the problems are around change and transition. Mm-hmm. Change is when there is an ending of a relationship. What do we do now? Change is when children move away. Changes when you are on a job and you aren't experiencing growth, and you're in your 40s or 50s. What do you do? So a lot of it, that's what I see the bulk of. Okay. Change and transition for human beings can be incredibly hard, especially those changes and transitions that have parts of our identity rooted in them. I am the mother of an adult person, an adult human. For many years, that was my child. He is not a child anymore. He is 22. He's almost 22 years old. But I remember when we had to, get him ready to make that change from living away from home. Those are hard. When you have a human living with you for 18 years, and then I needed some coaching. I needed some practice around, look, and now it's all good. It's all good now, so many years later. But during that transition, it was different. It was unfamiliar. I needed coaching as to how to kind of move into life in a different way, different from the way I was doing it before. Talk about values. My values during that time shifted. They changed. And I had to kind of really get present to that, how they shifted, how they changed, and develop a new plan.
I see. If a listener hears you talking about this and is intrigued and say, you know what, I've got some life experience. I've obviously got experience as a behavior analyst. This is something I think I could help people with.
Yes.
What sort of training and supervision should they seek out before, offering this type of service? We want to obviously make sure people aren't going out and doing things that they're not adequately prepared to do.
Yes. This is what I will say. There is no training in our field for life coaching. There is not. Mm-hmm. It is not regulated, so there's not like they have certificates popping up now, but you don't need a certificate to be a life coach. what I pulled from is for many years, I studied the science of mind, which is just an approach to living that teaches mindfulness. And that informs a lot of what I do in life coaching. So that training. And also now, like I said, the ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, that also informs a lot of what I do as a life coach.
I see. Fascinating. Thank you for indulging my curiosity. In that.
Sure.
It was really, really good stuff. All right. So I want to kind of wrap up here. This has been just a delightful conversation. Incredibly
It sure has. Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
The pleasure is mine. I'd like to leave you with the opportunity to give some advice for the newly minted BCBA. So if you had someone email you or call you up, say, hey, I just passed the exam.
Yes.
What advice would you give me?
Okay. Thank you for creating space for that, Matt. I appreciate it. Okay. I'm going to drop a gem. Okay. And this is for my newly minted BCBAs. Remember this. Your BCBA is a beginning. It's not an end. This is a beginning. Okay. So many of us have been led to believe that the BCBA is like a terminal degree. No, it's opening a door for more learning. This is what I'm going to tell you. And this is actually for everyone. We have so many hours that we're required to get as part of recredentialing. I'm going to suggest that each year you allot some of those hours to learn something new, something that you've never been exposed to before. I promise you it will keep you sharp. You know, I myself have been guilty of kind of staying in my camps. And recently I went to a conference and I got exposed to some more concepts around precision teaching. I love it.
Yes.
Because I hadn't interacted with that community for years. And I was relating to precision teaching from something that I had learned 20 years ago. So I'm going to call people, our newly minted folks. Your BCBA is a beginning, it's not an end. And as you move forward with your learning, be open to learning something new. What I always say, value being interested more than being interesting.
Ooh, that's good. That's really good.
Yes, get interested. Get interested. It will serve you well.
Awesome. I couldn't think of better words to conclude on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Cirincione. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.